Hola, en esta lección vamos a hablar del tiempo imperfecto y el imperfecto versus el pretérito. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about the imperfect tense and then the uses of the imperfect versus the preterite tense. As you have learned, we've been talking about the preterite tense as a way to communicate events or things that have happened in the past. So, as I mentioned in previous videos, there are two tenses in Spanish. One, the preterite, which we learned, and then this, the imperfect. So, as a general rule, the imperfect tense is going to be used when you're talking about something in the past that is a continuous action, perhaps something that is expressing what was happening or was in the process of happening in the past. Whereas the preterite tense is going to be used when we're talking about something that we know when it had a beginning and end. We know that it's been completed. We know, in a sense, we're saying that it happened at a certain time. It might also be something that an action that interrupts an action that's happening in the past. So that would be the preterite. So I tend to think of, when I think of the two different tenses, I think of the imperfect tense. If you can visualize this, you might want to close your eyes. Just visualize the imperfect tense as sort of a squiggly line. And you don't really know where the line begins or where the line ends because it's just something that is in the past that was sort of ongoing. So when I think about that kind of wavy, I guess you might say, wavy line, that sort of, it gives me the visual of an action that sort of is happening in progress. It's kind of moving. And when I think about, I don't know where the line begins or the line ends. It just kind of goes on and on both ways. That gives me that sense of a continuation or not having a definite beginning and end. And then when I think of the preterite, what I visualize in my head is a straight line, and we know the beginning and the end of the line. If you think about in math when you're learning about lines and you've got the points at each end. So we're just a straight line. We know, we see the one end of it and we see the other end and we see it's completed. So if you can make those visuals in your head, that might help. I know that helps me a lot. The preterite is that straight, short, distinct line. It's kind of like one little segment that you're taking out of the past. You know when it began and ended, and it just sort of happened. That's why I like the straight line, because it's something that just kind of sort of happened, and we're sort of taking a little moment in time out of that past timeline, and we've just got that little short straight line. So that visual may or may not help you. It's something I usually will draw on the board if we're doing an in-class assignment. But if you can think of that in your head, that squiggly line, that wavy, line that continues on and on and on, imperfecto, and then that preterite is just that straight, distinct little chunk taken out of the past, okay? So let's look at also the endings. I feel like the endings of these verbs also give me a little hint as to the feeling that the verb actually gives in the past. So when you look at the question, ¿Qué te pasó? ¿Qué te pasó? What happened to you? I'm using the preterite tense here. I'm talking about something specific. What happened? And you say, me torcí el tobillo. Me torcí. Okay? I sprained my ankle, right? Me torcí el tobillo. I'm telling you, I know exactly when this happened. It happened at a specific time. It's a specific event or action that happened in the past. And then the other question, ¿Dónde vivías de niño? ¿Dónde vivías? Okay? Vivías es la forma imperfecta, right? It's the imperfect form. So you see that ias ending. I think of it as just lighter, kind of fluffier ending. Ia versus, viví or viviste. Vivías is just a little bit softer. And so I think of it as, where did you used to live? We don't know exactly the time, beginning or end. We're just kind of asking in the past. So when you see that de niño as a child, it's just referring to the past, but not a specific point in time. And then you might answer, vivía en San Jose. I lived, or kind of like saying I used to live in San Jose. Again, describing something going on in the past. So let's look at some other uses of the imperfect tense. And at the end of this video, we are going to go and talk about the two and compare the two. But for now, we're going to focus on the el imperfecto. So the imperfect tense we use when something was habitual or repeated in the past. We did something over and over again. So using the verb ir, íbamos al parque los domingos. Íbamos. We used to go to the park. This is a form of ir. Okay, íbamos al parque los domingos. Okay, we would go, we used to go. Okay, events or actions that were in progress. Now we've learned the present progressive, right? Estoy leyendo, estoy escuchando. And then you could always use the past progressive. Estaba leyendo, estaba estudiando. But you're going to also still need to conjugate that form of estar in one of the past tenses. So here we're going to be using the imperfect tense, but we don't really have to use that form to still get across the message of an action that was going on in the past. It was an action in progress. So when I say yo leía mientras él estudiaba, I'm saying that I was doing this while he was doing that. So I was reading, yo leía, mientras él estudiaba. Okay, so again, take note of these endings, ia and aba. And then, of course, if you're describing something in the past, if you're giving a description of someone's physical appearance, physical characteristics, okay, if you're describing someone's mental or emotional state, okay, if you're giving a description of what the weather was like or what something, you know, what the condition was like, all going to use el imperfecto. If you're telling the time in the past, it was 3 o'clock, 3:30. Okay, if you're telling someone's age, okay, when I was 6 years old, right? Cuando tenía 6 años. So let's look at these examples. Era alto y guapo. He was tall and handsome. You can kind of translate that in a sense as he used to be, right? He was when he was younger. Era alto y guapo. This is your form of ser. Quería mucho a mi familia. He loved his family a lot. Quería mucho a su familia. Okay. Talking about a feeling in the past, so that's going to use el imperfecto. Eran las 3:30, telling the time. La hora en el pasado. Eran las 3:30. It's a form of ser. Instead of son las 3:30, we're saying it was 3:30. Eran. And then finally telling the age. Los niños tenían 6 años. The children were 6 years old, or they had 6 years, right? Tenían. We use el imperfecto. So these expressions are often going to be used with the imperfect. Some of these expressions, are going to be used with the imperfect tense. De niño or de niña. So you're saying like as a child, when I was younger, right? Todos los días, todos los meses, todas las semanas, right? Todos los domingos. Anytime you're saying todos los, and you're talking about something being habitual, you did over and over again, you're going to use it imperfecto. And then mientras. Mientras is indicating while. So while something was going on, this happened. So if you're using mientras and then talking about the past tense, or speaking in the past tense, then you're most likely going to use the el imperfecto. Okay, so let's look at the endings now. So we learned the preterite tense endings, right? We had that very distinct haste, o, amos, aron, and then you had your iste, yo, imos, ieron. Well, the imperfect, kind of like that wavy line that goes on and on, I feel like the tenses sort of remind me of that too. They're just a little bit more flowy, a little bit more soft. So we say cantaba, bebía, escribía. So our endings are aba, abas, aba, abamos, aban, or ia, ias, ia, iamos, ian. Now, one great thing about el imperfecto is it's super easy to conjugate. You only have the same form for er and ir verbs in all subjects, and then of course your ar verbs are very similar. So you have aba, abas, aba, abamos, aban are your endings for ar verbs, and then ia, ias, ia, iamos, ian are your endings for er and ir verbs. Okay. Another great thing to note is that there are no stem changers in the imperfect. We do have a couple of irregular verbs, as you already saw at the beginning. Ir and ser are irregular, which we'll talk about. But there are no stem changers. So the stem always stays the same, and you just simply add on that ending. Entender is normally a stem changer, right? But not in el imperfecto. Entendíamos japonés, right? Servir is usually a stem changer. El camarero les servía el café. He was serving, right? The café. Doler is usually O-D-U-E. A Javier le dolía el tobillo, right? Javier had pain in his ankle, right? His ankle was hurting him. So any verbs that are normally stem changers in other tenses, in the present or the preterite, are not going to be stem changers in el imperfecto. They're just going to have their regular ending. All right. And then the form of I, that impersonal expression I, which means there is and there are, right? Hay muchas personas aquí. Hay nubes en el cielo, right? Hay viento. When we're saying there is or there are something, the past tense of that is había. Había would be like there was or there were. So if I said today, hoy hay muchos nubes, right? There's a lot of clouds today, right? Ayer no había. Okay, there weren't a lot yesterday. Okay, hoy hay lluvia. Today there's rain, right? Ayer no había lluvia. Right, there wasn't any yesterday. Let's look at the irregulars. As I said, there's only a few, so we just have these three: ir, ser, and ver. Ir becomes iba. It's almost like a combination between the er and the ar and the er endings. So ir, iba. Yo iba a la tienda. I was going to the store, or I used to go to the store. Iba, ibas, iba, íbamos, iban. And then ser becomes era. Yo era una niña. Yo era baja cuando era niña. Okay, tú eras, él era, nosotros éramos, ellos eran. And then ver. Ver, it just drops the R and it keeps the E there in part of the stem. And you just add the ia, ias, ia, íamos, ian. So veía, veías, veía, veíamos, veían, right? Nosotros veíamos una película. We were watching a movie, right? We were watching a movie. Okay, so the next set of slides, we're going to talk about comparing the two tenses. Okay, so now that we've learned how to conjugate, we're going to talk about, they're not going to be used interchangeably, okay? You're going to use one or the other depending on the situation. So let's look at this situation. Me rompí el brazo cuando estaba paseando en bicicleta. This is an example of something that I did when something else was going on. Me rompí el brazo. I broke my arm, right? Cuando estaba paseando en bicicleta. When I was riding on a bike, okay? Tenía dolor de cabeza, okay? I had a headache. So talking about how I felt. So we use el imperfecto, right? Pero me tomé una aspirina y se me fue. Okay? So this is how I was feeling. We use the imperfect. But then we talk about what I did. Me tomé una aspirina. Se me fue. And then what happened? It went away. Okay. So we use the preterite when we want to express an action that we think of as completed. Like we said, Sandra se rompió la pierna. She broke her leg. Right? Fueron a Buenos Aires. They went to Buenos Aires. This is what happened. Done and over with. And we use imperfect, on the other hand, when we're describing something that was ongoing with no really reference to when it began or ended. We don't really know for sure. Sandra esperaba al doctor. Right? She was waiting for the doctor, okay? Or esperaba al doctor por mucho tiempo. She waited for a long time, you could say. El médico se preocupaba por sus pacientes, okay? The doctor always worried about his patients. So this is a description. We don't really know when it began or when he began or ended worrying, right? Other uses, when we know the beginning or end of an action, like la película empezó a las 9, right? The movie began at 9, okay? Ayer terminé el proyecto para la clase de química, right? Yesterday, ayer, kind of gives me that indication that I'm going to be using el pretérito, right? Because it happened yesterday. And then, of course, expressing a habitual past action. So something that happened over and over again. Cuando era joven, jugaba al tenis. When I was younger, I used to play tennis, okay? It kind of went over and over. I did it many times, right? De niño, Eduardo se enfermaba con mucha frecuencia. Okay, de niño, as a child, right? Eduardo used to get sick a lot. So again, talking about things that we don't know really when they began or ended, we just know that they used to occur some point in the past. Okay, and then narrating in the past, describing a series of events that happened. La doctora me miró los oídos, me hizo una pregunta, se escribió la receta, right? The doctor, she looked in my ears, she asked some questions, and then she wrote the receipt, or the prescription, right? And then on the other hand, if we're describing physical and emotional states, la chica quería descansar, se sentía mal y tenía dolor de cabeza. or describing how the girl